With the average home monthly rental rate in the UK rising to £937 and £1,800 in Australia, we'll take a look at how the increasingly popular lifestyle choice of home renting may be tying you back from a life of freedom. Up next. Did you know that renting a home originates from slavery? Yup, slavery. So in this video, Shar, we'll wander through the history of home renting and then take a look at its impact on your time, your money, and the environment. Then we'll share a few alternatives. Between 6,000 years ago in ancient Mesopotamia and today's Iraq, and 4,000 years ago in ancient Egypt, or aka Kemet, the first renters were peasant farmers or sharecroppers who were tied back to the bottom of the social pyramid, along with slaves. Often referred to as tenant farming, landowners told them what to grow, and they had to pay a portion of their harvest, usually half, as rent back to the landowner. Paying half of their income often left families with barely enough to eat. Now remember that figure half. We'll revisit that again later. Now 2,500 years ago in ancient Rome, the tenant-landowner relationship had evolved slightly with early attempts to implement rent control, building codes, etc. Wealthy landowners named patricians still had slaves as they were prisoners of war, but allowed them, along with plebeians, the term for poor people back then, to rent living areas at sky-high rates, sustaining the widening gap between the rich and the poor. Proof of the profitability and inequitable distribution of wealth as a result of renting back then is a man named Marcus Licinius Crassus. Marcus lived in Rome from 115 BC to 53 BC. He was a major developer and real estate mogul and known as the richest man in Rome, and some say the richest that ever lived. After some of his small inner-city properties burned down, he was known as saying that he was as happy as he could be now that he could charge higher rental prices on newly constructed tenant homes. Now, in order to have a so-called landowner, some type of property right had to be established first. In those days, this usually was at the will of kings and queens. 800 years ago, this changed with infamous Magna Carta, the first legal document in the West to clearly place the king under the law and establish property rights and taxation for the freemen. But most people were not freemen or women. They were peasants called villeins or serfs and had to work the land of the freemen for life. The only way out was to purchase a plot of land and pay dues to the lord, the guy he or she just bought the land from. Very few were able to save up enough money to get out of feudal renting. Moving forward to the early 1800s in the US, there were areas where African American slaves were freed, and these ex-slaves continued to work for their previous owners because oftentimes the homes that they lived in were located on their ex-owner's property, and they had built those themselves. As free people, they had two options if they wanted to stay in their homes: pay rent or work more daily hours on the estate. The former, paying rent, was a calculated move to diminish the rent earnings from sales of their provisions in local markets and to make the ex-slave more dependent on wages for their livelihood. Forcing slaves into a home rental obligation quickly changed their titles from slave owner to landlord employer and the ex-slave to renter and employee. Towards the late 1800s and early 1900s, stories of tenement housing for America's early European immigrants also tell of terrible living conditions at the will of property owners. And in colonial South Africa, the dispossession of Africans and the eventual renting scheme sealed a power balance in favor of the European invaders. Now let's take a look at how home renting impacts your money. Depending on the housing market you're in, it may be cheaper to rent than to finance a home or vice versa. But in either scenario, you'll end up paying thousands of dollars. In renting's case, over a 30-year period, 30 to 50% of your income will be lost. For the average earner, that's about $600,000 in Australia, $470,000 in the US, or £350,000 in the UK. Now, the Australian Bureau of Statistics says housing rent is increasing twice as fast as wages, and if you're renting a home in the US, a report states that the cost of renting in the US has risen to its least affordable ever, taking up a record proportion of income in most major cities, many paying 30% of the monthly income and LA renters paying 50% of their hard-earned cash every month to a landlord. So do the math. How much have you paid in rent over the years? Is it enough to buy a home? It may have been enough to buy 20. We'll explore that later. P.S. If you fall into the middle class or lower income bracket, did you know that you pay a disproportionately higher amount on energy bills than the rich? This is because the home you pay rent on is often using older, outdated appliances and is not properly insulated. In the US, a full-time employee works 40 hours a week plus an additional 10 hours a week commute, and with 70% of us unhappy with our jobs, that's 50 hours a week that could have rather been spent building relationships. For many, working full-time hours are necessary to pay today's rental rates, and after other daily errands leaves less time for hanging out with friends or significant others. Learning new skills. What did you enjoy doing as a child when the time seemed to pass quickly? Do you still do that today? Do you take time out for personal development or to enjoy your favorite hobby? Again, with 70% of us working jobs we don't enjoy, this may be useful in skilling up to a new career. Unfortunately, using up 50 hours per week, 30 to 50% of that to pay rent, takes time away from developing this. Building awareness. Aristotle once said that the ultimate value of life depends upon awareness and the power of contemplation, rather than upon mere survival. Are you working to survive? For those of you working full-time, do you have time left over to reflect, contemplate, be aware? Cooking, or for some of us, learning to cook. After a long 9-hour day, 3 to 4.5 hours of which goes towards your rent, do you have enough time to prepare healthy meals and learn new recipes? How often do you eat out or prepare processed food to compensate for a lack of time? Housing development for renting has big impacts on the environment, from land degradation to water and food supply pressures. When buildings are built, they require a massive amount of natural resources, and most were built without sustainability or the planet in mind. Now that we're here though, here's 2 ways that rental homes are impacting the environment post-construction. The first one is called split incentive. Now, the average Australian home is responsible for 1/5 of Australia's greenhouse emissions, with similar stats in the US and UK, mainly due to poor building design, resistance to switching to renewable energy sources, and outdated appliances. Most of the time, when you rent out a home or apartment, the landlord or principal is responsible for buying all the energy-using stuff in a home, like appliances, air conditioners, while the tenant gets stuck paying the energy bills. This gives incentive for landlords to turn a blind eye to investing in more eco-friendly, efficient facilities. The other issue is the poverty cycle problem. According to a 2015 report from the Australia Housing Urban Research Institute, renters are more likely to experience poverty and housing stress than homeowners. And because they shovel out 30 to 50% of their income on rent, they have difficulty adjusting to higher energy prices and the ability to invest in more energy-saving appliances or infrastructure. By the way, they mentioned that landlords stand to get richer by investing in carbon and water-reducing facilities, as they can then sell their home or unit, or even worse, charge higher rents again. Even if you have the money to get those cool solar panels on sale, most regions have local tenant policies which prohibit renters to make alterations to a rental property. Did you know that 37% of homes in the US and 30% of homes in Australia are rented? That means there's millions and millions of homes where the owner, the only one that can make changes to the property, has no responsibility for the guzzling up of our water and energy supplies. Okay, so we've learned that home renters are more financially strained than homeowners, paying 30 to 50% of their weekly checks to fatten the wallets of landlords, and as a result, have less cash to spend on stuff than ever before. So what's the impact of that? Well, let's take a look at Sally, for example. She rents a 2-bedroom apartment with her son in the city. After paying rent and utilities, she needs to go to the grocery store to buy food. Heading down the first aisle, she sees some bread. One loaf is locally made using organic ingredients for $4.99, and the other is made 1,500 miles away using chemically laced ingredients for $1.79 a loaf. She looks at her son and wishes she could grab the organic loaf, but chooses the cheap one. She goes down the cleaning aisle and chooses the cheap chemically laced cleaner over the eco-gray water-safe one, again because she has to stretch her remaining dollars until the next paycheck. House renting ties most of us back in a system of perpetual poverty and provides a barrier to being smart, eco-conscious consumers. And with the low-income segment getting larger and larger, that's bad news for the planet. On top of that, the US and Australia have the largest homes in the world, with the average US apartment clocking in at 982 square meters, giving us the illusion that we need to fill that empty space with more stuff we can't often afford, that stresses us out and leads to compulsive behaviors like binge eating, drinking, gambling, or numbing it all out with television, where we watch more illusion-driven commercials that tighten the ropes of our consumer slavery. Now let's cut loose! One option is rent to own. In this option, some of your hard-earned money goes to build equity, adding wealth to your bottom line. Another option are tiny homes. People with no prior building skills have built tiny homes, sometimes on trailers to add mobility, that cost less than $10,000. They're fully off-grid with no utility bills. One may be required to rethink space for this one to work. Oh, and remember your calculation above and how much you've spent so far on rent? So how many $10,000 homes could you own by now? Another option are conversion vans or RVs. For the less crafty of us, living in a converted van, camper van, or RV is an option. Depending on what you think you need inside, this lifestyle beats a cookie-cutter home in price and travel, and it's adventure-friendly. Another option is school bus conversion. For the ones who want it all, a classic school bus conversion into home on wheels may be the ultimate alternative to spending tens of thousands of dollars in rent. If you don't like your neighbor, move on. Bicycle homes are another example. Bicycle homes on wheels cost about $3,000, and they offer a home with the ability to travel. We'll put some links to some cool bicycle homes down below in the description box. Another roadblock to escape the rent trap may be in your head. You may be asking, what will my friends say and family say? Is it safe? Will I be able to adjust to this lifestyle? Well, there's a lot of resources out there to help answer those questions. We'll list them below. Remember, it's your life, and you should be in charge of deciding what to do with it. Continuing to be tied back by spending 40 hours a week chasing money to enrich a stranger because it's the norm, or cutting loose by rejecting that concept and seeking out alternatives because they're out there. So go for it. So what would you like our next video to be about? Let us know below, and if we pick yours, we'll give you a shout out. If you like this video, please hit the like, subscribe buttons to get more videos each month. If you'd like to support us, plus get some boho freedom goodies, head over to our Patreon page. And remember, freedom may be just a shard away. I'll see you next time on Bohopia, the Freedom Channel.